Alright, welcome to another episode of Military Q&A, where I will try my very best to answer all your questions and speculations about things that happen during whatever war you choose for me to answer questions about. I am trying to be a little bit superficial on the level, because if you are a die-hard military historian, you already know this. But for a lot of you, you don't know the basics. I'm trying to go with the basics unless the questions are die-hard specific. This is, thank God, a little bit less specific because there's so much of this I could talk about forever. The next question is, did Germany benefit from the tripartite pact? The pact of mutual cooperation between Japan, Italy, and Germany signed in 1936, which was about mutual agreement, where the key point that I will be getting back to is Article number 3. Japan, Germany, Italy agrees to cooperate in their efforts to force an alliance, blah, 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 to further undertake to assist one another with all political, economic, and military means if one of the contracting powers is attacked by a power at not present, not involved with a European war, or on the Japanese-Chinese conflict. Remember, Japan had been waging war with China for quite a while in Manchuria, and from 1932 to 1939, there's been war waging, non-declared, between Japan and Russia going on their territories. It finally ended in 1939. It was a lot of little skirmishes, a little undeclared war, but we'll get back to that because it'll be important. Also, at the time of the signing, 1936, Germany was on the rise, Italy was on the rise, and Japan was sort of on the rise as well. But the question is, did Germany benefit from signing a pact with Japan? No. Alright, moving on. Alright, fine, okay. Yeah, I had to do it that way. I'm still going to go with generally no. Here's why. In the pact, there was cooperation, and there was quite a lot of sophisticated technology that went from Germany to Japan before and during the war. There were some spectacular meetings and flags and U-boats visiting each other, but there was exchange of certain technology that Japan lacked. There was an admiration from the German military towards the toughness and ruthlessness and dedicated patriotism of the Japanese soldier. There was also a bit of distrust. One of the parts was a military cooperation, which would of course also mean the sharing of intelligence and intentions, which did not really occur that much. It did, but then again, it didn't. They kind of continuously forgot to tell each other what they were going to do when it comes to pacts. I'll get to that in a minute. But there was quite a bit of military hardware, plans, technology that went from Germany to Japan, including at the very end of the war, a submarine laden with a bunch of infrared detonators, a very, very intelligent nuclear scientist called Hans Schlickert, a Luftwaffe general, and an ME-262 packed in crates just for the good measure. There was supposedly some uranium was in there as well. Yeah. Gonna go to Japan. It ended up in America. But it was intended for Japan. Maybe. However, before that, there was other submarines that went from Germany to Japan. And here's the problem with cooperation between Japan and Germany. They are very far from each other. So it's hard to back each other up militarily if it came to that. Culturally, well, they were both led by a semi-militarized government that was very patriotic, or so I guess there's that. Other than that, not a whole lot of cultural mutual. They're kind of different countries, let's put it that way. There were corporations on the Navy side during the war with German submarines would venture all the way out into the Pacific. They would dock and refuel. And if you read some of the German submarine captains, it was somewhat a reluctant cooperation, where the sharing of intelligence was not always very forthcoming. And the moment Germany was out of the war, the Japanese interned and sometimes mistreated all the German submarine crews that was within their territory, which is a strange thing to do to somebody you were supposed to have a warm allied relationship with. So, it's hard to see that it was always, during the war, a benefit to Germany, especially since there's not a whole lot Japan could do to actually help Germany during its war effort, except siphon off American assets. It was quite clear that Adolf Hitler did not want to go to war with England, and really did not want to go to war with America. Whether he had the same respect for America that he did for England is a little bit uncertain, but from hearsay, and this is important, when you read his own words in interviews and people that were near him, he spoke very warmly and fondly of the British, at least until the war turned hot. Not so much about the Americans. But I don't think he wanted war with America. They were very far away. Quite frankly, he did not see the point. Japan, on the other hand, was heading towards war with America. For whatever fault, wherever the fault lay, one could say that American politicians and politics and embargoes and restrictions on the Japanese forced them into an action that had, by American tacticians, historians, politicians, been foreseen. So something was coming. Hitler did not know that Japan was going to bomb Pearl Harbor. The Japanese did not inform him. Also, Hitler had not informed Japan of the Ribbentrop Pact that he signed with the Russians in 1939. Japan also did not inform Hitler, the Germans, that they signed a pact of neutrality with the Russians on April 13th, 1941. It was a very much of a whatever we're going to do, we're not going to tell our close allies about. Remember when Germany signed the treaty with Stalin? Well, that freed up a whole lot of Russian troops to go back to the east and fight the Japanese, with whom they were still at odds. Now, are you telling me that when Japan decided to not invade Russia in 41 with German forces outside of Moscow, that was not a little FU in the back of their mind? The Germans signed a treaty with the Russians at the very time when Japan needed their treaty in effect with Germany to keep Russian troops from moving. Just like the Germans really needed the Japanese to make a move in the east, as they were stalled on the eastern front outside Moscow, or to the west of Japan. And that continued. And the Japanese minister was hoping for quite a while to see a pact between Japan, Russia, and Germany against the rest of the world that did not regard Japan for much. And all the way up until 41, where the Japanese signed a treaty with the Russians before the German invasion of Russia. They did not tell the Germans of that, thinking possibly that they were still hoping for the possibility after the Ribbentrop Pact treaty. Now the Japanese signed a treaty with the Russians, maybe the three could actually get along. And of course that was a very, very optimistic view, because there was no way Germany and Russia was not going to get into it. Stalin and Hitler were going to get into a fight. Now, what was Japan going to do in this fight? Of course, having signed a mutual agreement, Hitler could have hoped Japan would back him up in the war against Russia. However, Japan was rather bitter that they were almost just finally done fighting a war with Russia, barely, still, on the borders, when Germany signed a treaty with Russia, without telling Japan, of course. And as Hitler was planning for Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, the Japanese signed a non-aggression treaty with Russia without telling Hitler. Still, as the Germans marched on into Russia, I am sure there was a hope that Japan would enter the war on the side of Germany, as Italy indeed have done. By the way, also Mussolini was rather annoyed with Hitler that he had not told him of the invasion of France. All these close allies really didn't trust each other much or communicate much either. But then again, we look at the French, British, American, and Russians, very strange allies as well, that really had few words of love for each other in the secrecy of their own homes. Of course, everybody also spied on everybody, and everybody broke each other's codes and read each other's memos, which led to 1941. As winter drew, the German troops were sitting outside of Moscow. Not many miles away, they could see the spires of the Kremlin, and Hitler hoped, wanted, possibly expect the Japanese to attack the Russians in the east. Certainly, for a while, Stalin kept a lot of tough, hardened Siberian troops in the east, expecting such a Japanese attack, not being one to be caught off guard. He kept a large contingent of well-trained Russian troops there. However, the Japanese had every intention of keeping their word in their treaty with the Russians. They were not going to attack. And this word leaked out through spies to the Russians, releasing hundreds of thousands of well-trained Russian troops for the defense of Moscow. Just in time, and they defended Moscow and drove the Germans back. So, did it benefit Germany to have a treaty with Japan in the instance where they were this far away from taking Moscow, possibly ending the war? All Japan had to do was attack Russia, holding down those troops, and she didn't. So in that instance, when it came to the one time where Japan could actually militarily have helped the German war effort, she didn't. I'm going to say, okay, no. But what did Japan do in 1941 in December? She attacked Pearl Harbor, which she did not, as aforementioned, inform Adolf Hitler about. And most historians will look back on this and say this was one of the fatal steps Hitler made towards his own demise by declaring war on America. And I tend to agree. Practically, it leveraged all of Americans' goodwill or will to not go to war, and turned it into a will towards going to war against Germany. The Europe first, Germany first policy became adopted, and well, the Marines and the Navy fought against the Japanese, but the majority of the forces went to Europe to fight against the Germans. And the intention was always to defeat Germany first and then deal with Japan. Which is strange, because if you are an American mom and dad, housewife, population normal in 1941, Japan attacks you. Okay, fine, they're bad people, let's go get them. Germany just declared war on you. Okay, but they didn't do anything. And then you send all your sons to Europe to fight Germany, not the people who just attacked you. But that was the policy, and you didn't ask questions like that back then. However, you got to look at it a little deeper. Why did Hitler declare war? Technically, the clause in that treaty did not say he had to. Only if Japan had been attacked was Germany obligated to declare war. And here, Japan had attacked, and then they were declared war upon. Hitler was not that stupid. He didn't get to where he was by doing dumb things. He made some clever decisions, and everybody asked, why would he do something like this? Horrible decision. But during World War I, the U.S. have supplied all of Germany's enemies with weapons, with money, ships, submarines, way before they entered the war. And World War II was no different. The U.S. have supplied Russia, supplied England. All of Germany's enemies were supplied, funded by the U.S. The U.S. warships were shooting at German submarines, planes. Planes were attacking German shipping. So actively, a war had been waged by America against Germany for years. The problem was the German Navy had been begging for permission to fight back and sink American shipping or planes or warships that was actively waging war on it. They were begging to sink some of the convoys heading to Russia, England. But Hitler did not want to provoke an active war with America at that time, although America was actively waging war on Germany for years. So this was more or less the time to make official an act that already was. His admirals were begging for permission to fight back. Was it going to happen eventually? Yes, probably. Just like World War I, eventually America would have found its way into the war. It was probably just hastened by Hitler's decision to actively declare war on the United States, something he would not have done had he not been in business with the Japanese. And for that very singular reason, I am going to declare that yes, it was not in Germany's benefit to have signed that treaty with Japan. Had Hitler not declared war on America at the time he did, it is very conceivable there would have been no public desire for a war against Germany when they were just attacked by the Japanese. And the sole focus of the United States military would be Japan and not Germany. Even though there might still have been supplies sent out that way, they would have focused on Japan. That would have given Germany some time to deal with Russia first, and then turn back to the West. However, that is a bit of speculation. When Germany saw the end coming, more and more very advanced technology went from Germany to Japan. So Japan was able to build a version of the Me-262. They sent V-1s, they sent V-2s, and the plans, the Hetzer plans, and the cannon for that armament went to Japan, alongside with a lot of other things. However, Japan had been waging war for years. They were under embargo. They did not have access to oils and raw materials, and could not build the technology the Germans had, no matter how much they were desiring to fight the war and continue. One could say that Japan, from those plans and blueprints and from that technology, benefited more than Germany did from ending up an official war with America quite some time before they would have probably gone there anyway. But I'm going to go with a no for that reason. Now, I have a very interesting question about, it's very simple, why was Operation Bodenplatte ultimately a failure for the Germans? Now, for those of you who don't know, Bodenplatte was carried out in the very beginning in January of 1945. It was originally an operation that was set in motion to support the Battle of the Bulge, or the Ardennes Offensive, the last-ditched effort of the German military to cut off the Allies heading to the port of Antwerp. And as the weather cleared, they were shot to shit by Allied aircraft. Of course, the French, the British, the Americans had bases all over France. They had air superiority. That thing, you know what I mean. They owned the skies. So one last-ditch effort was put in motion by the German Air Force in order to try to at least stem the tide against all of those Allied aircrafts that kept swarming the skies and bombing the crap out of everything on the errand. General Major Dietrich Peltz was assigned to lead the operation. He was Hermann Göring's commander-in-chief. You had pilots from the 2nd Jagd Corps, the 3rd Jagd Division, and the 5th Jagd Division carried the operation. Operation Bodenplatte assigned over 900 German aircraft to the attack 16 Allied airfields in Belgium, Netherlands, and France. Hopefully, to destroy a couple of things. You had some of the really cool Me-262s flying in there. You had Focke-Wulf 190 and 190D and Messerschmitt Bf 109 flying in the attack. Now, secrecy was so important that they didn't tell even the pilots where they were going and what they were doing until they were almost in the air. Problem was, this secrecy also extended to all the anti-aircraft gunners anywhere near any of the installations the Germans still possessed, including the V-2 weapon sites. that means quite a few planes of the Germans were shot down by their own gunners because they had no idea there was a German plane in the sky. Remember the old joke? If said by the Germans during the war, if you see a plane in the daytime, it's American. If you hear it at night, it's British. And if it's invisible, it's German. It was actually estimated that almost a quarter of the German losses was due to their own gunners because of that secrecy. That's a bummer. But then again, what are you going to do? It will say that this attack, just like the Ardennes offensive, took the British and Americans somewhat off guard. Although only 11 out of the 34 air combat groups made it to their target on time. And the Allies were pretty much able to put their planes out in the air to mount some substantial counteroffensive. It is said 305 Allied airplanes were destroyed and 190 damaged during this operation. However, the Germans lost 280 planes and 174 pilots. Now, out of 900 airplanes, that might not seem so significant. You also think about a lot of fuel that was suspended in this operation. Now here's the problem. So let's say numbers are good, you destroy maybe 500 Allied aircraft in this operation of all air forces. In this last ditch effort, Germany's airplane production was being bombed day and night. So production of planes, spare parts, and fuel was precious. Very hard to get fuel, very hard to get trained pilots, since most of them had been killed through the past 5 years of war. So let's say we, with a good-hearted gesture, say they destroyed 500 Allied aircraft. This is American aircraft production alone. During 1945 alone, American aircraft, training aircraft, 26,000. Transport aircraft, 5,600 produced in that 1 year alone. More importantly here, attack aircraft, 12,539 manufactured by the Americans alone. Not including those produced by the British, and by the Russians, by the Canadians. Now you look into allies that might produce, shall we say, 6, 8, 10,000 planes in the first couple of months of January 1945. So losing 500 aircraft is a drop in the bucket, and it made no difference for the air war. Maybe a few days, maybe a week of setback and surprise, but the losses on the German side, those 280 aircraft and 174 pilots, those they could not replace. And in that sense, Operation Bodenplatte was a failure. One could also say the same reason that the Ardennes offensive was a failure, because eventually they ran out of fuel. When the skies cleared, they did not have air support. Now one could say, if the Germans had used half of the aircraft, spent half of that fuel for the tanks in the Ardennes offensive, had those remaining half of planes standing by to lend air cover to the Ardennes offensive and reconnaissance. So the moment the skies cleared over the Ardennes, the German aircraft would have been up there to counter and fly protection for the Ardennes offensive, plus lending them some fuel. That might have made a difference. Then the Germans might have found the Allied fuel depots. They might have bombed other Allied fuel depots. They might have been able to put 200-300 planes in the sky over the Ardennes area and to fly in cover for all those soldiers. That would have made a far bigger difference if there had been that coordination. That's strange, because the Germans are quite famous for their air-army coordination and communication. Here they failed. They had two separate offensives that ultimately led to enormous losses they could ill afford, that they could have used in the defense of their own borders, or in cooperation for one coordinated defensive attack. So in that sense, they couldn't lose it, and it was a failure. So, moving on to asks, was Rommel all he was cracked up to be? Yes, he was. Have a nice day. Okay, you want more? Let me explain. Actually, I'll pull you in the right direction because that's a better way of doing this. Rommel was a charismatic officer. He understood how to lead from the front. He understood how to take chances. Well, some say he was out of touch with logistics, and some say he was not. Some say he was prone to take chances because he didn't understand the logistical situation of his own military. I say they're wrong. And I will tell you what I think you should do as soon as I am done talking about this. You need to go onto the video I will plug right here now. TIK, T-I-K. Look at the video I am highlighting at this very moment. I have never seen a battle broken down in more detail, more accuracy than in this video. And instead of me spending 6 hours doing the same thing, which I probably could not even do nearly as good, I think you should crack a beer and watch this video about this operation in Africa and how Rommel handled it, because I think this will give you the best indication of what type of commander Rommel was and why and how, because he was a person. And we have to remember, Erwin Rommel was a general's general. During World War I, he was a young lieutenant. In the course of 2 days during World War I, Rommel's men defeated 5 enemy regiments. It took more than 9,000 prisoners. Of German casualties, only had 36, with 6 of them were fatal. He also fought on the Western Front against France, where he captured 4 French blockhouses, having to lead his own troops at gunpoint, forcing them to follow him through the wire. He was always a leader's leader, which enabled him to stay in the German army after the Treaty of Versailles. He was a charismatic leader, and he knew how to get things done. And if you read the accounts of Rommel during the invasion of France, as I have, his men loved him. He was not a field marshal or even a general at the time, but he understood to lead at the front. He understood the harshness of war. He was a soldier's soldier. And I absolutely do not think what happened to him was merited. I think quite possibly, as our president said yesterday, should have sat down, have a conversation and between the different parties and figured out what's what. And if only Rommel had survived the war to have beers with Patton, the conversations they would have had. But yes, I think he was, because he understood how to build. He understood how to build PR around himself. He did. He understood how to ingratiate himself and be there at the right times and say the right things and look good on the cover of the magazines. There's a little bit of politician in him, but he also understood the art of war. He understood warfare. And again, we can go back to one of the biggest failings of the German military and Rundstedt versus Rommel during Normandy and the Normandy preparations was that nobody listened to him, and he was constantly at odds with Field Marshal Rundstedt about where to put the defenses and where to meet the Allied invasion. And Rommel always said, meet them on the beaches. If they get just in, if they get a foothold, the war's lost. He knew that from fighting the Allies in Africa and seeing what superior air power could do. He was a smart man, and again, the circumstance around his death was very unfortunate, and I don't think they were merited from Hitler's point of view. Somebody might have. It seems that I think it was the chief of staff Spindle that mentioned to him that something was going to happen, and he did not take part of it. It was. I'm sure there's a lot of rumors and speculation, conversation, but it seems to me that some of his fellow officers sold him out in order to save their own ass, which did not help. But yes, I actually think Rommel was all he was cracked up to be. Watch this video. It explains one of Rommel's more famous campaigns far better than I can here. It is absolutely worth it. Tick is doing a great job. On that note, could the Germans have won the Battle of Norway if they did it 2 weeks earlier? Well, they won the Battle of Norway, so yes, 2 weeks earlier would have been better, because the British would not have been as prepared. Understand that the battle for the invasion of Norway was a race between the British and the Germans and who's going to get there first. And it was a new thing with how the Kriegsmarine was not entirely on board with how we're going to get all these men, people, and equipment from here to there and unload them and possibly under fire. And it was a hastily put together plan when it became clear that the British were going to make an invasion attempt at Norway. So whoever got there first. So 2 weeks earlier would have put the British preparations, their plans, further away, and it would have made life easier for the Germans, as there would have been a less prepared resistance in Norway. One other important aspect of that, about the 2 weeks difference, is where was HMS Warspite? Now, a 15-inch gun battleship makes a bit of a difference on things. And the HMS Warspite was the grand old war dog of the British fleet. Just been up-modernized, got new planes, new superstructure of doom. Yes, thank you. It was originally sent to the Mediterranean, but after the Royal Oak had been sunk, it's been recalled back, and was around the Norwegian fjords at the time of the German invasion. Sunk 3 German ships, damaged 5 others, and her seaplane sunk the first German submarine of the war, the U-64. And after that, her seaplane continued to locate all the other German ships and telegraph their positions. So the Warspite would be, I would say, one of the single biggest determining factors of how things could have gone different 2 weeks before. Let's say, for argument's sake, warships don't sit still anywhere. It was further away and would not have been there until after the fact. Then the Germans would not have lost all those ships and submarines and men. So the Warspite's presence, or possibly 2 weeks earlier non-presence, I have not been able to locate exactly where she was 2 weeks before the actual time of the invasion. All I could find was she was patrolling the neighborhood. The neighborhood could be hundreds of nautical miles away, and that would have made a difference. But I would say 2 weeks earlier, the Germans would have lost fewer ships and fewer men and met less resistance, and the British would not have been as prepared, possibly have abandoned the whole operation of the Germans and beat them to it, and established footholds in and around all the German Norwegian ports at the time. So yes, those 2 weeks could have made a quite significant difference, I would say. And with that, I will leave you for now until the next Q&A. Please send me your questions, and I'll do my very best to answer them, and hopefully in a better, more interesting surroundings. Maybe I'll even get a haircut, depending if the barbershop's open again. And maybe I can come up with some interesting graphics. Now, please do remember, I'm doing all this on my own time because I believe that history is insanely important for you all to learn. And I don't want there to be any unanswered questions. And myself and several other great historians spent a lot of time and effort, non-paid, here on YouTube and other formats to answer questions and to bring you historical events that are important. And I'd love to engage with you guys some more. I'd love to have more feedback, more questions, and follow. The more follows, the more views I get on this, the more a little bit of money I get from YouTube to actually go out to some of these locations and film them. And I'm counting and hoping in all your support. But send me your questions below, Facebook, Patreon. Send me a carrier pigeon. I might eat it afterwards. Make no promises. And next week, we're going to talk about Nikita Khrushchev and why he was ousted. And we are going to talk about HMS Warrior, transported back in time. And I'm going to tack on a couple other questions that I just got as we're sitting here. See you soon, and have a nice day. Go have a scone and a cup of tea.